Discworld's coming back to the RPG scene with a brand new system. About 2 weeks ago, Modiphius Entertainment released a QuickStart to get everyone hyped up. I printed it out, bound it, and made a quick look video, but all went a bit wrong. I scripted it up, but it kept going off the script. I was just ambling on, and it's taken me so long trying to get the free time to look at it, actually I've discovered it all feels fairly disjointed. Rather than scrapping all that work, or just giving up, I decided to do a Ankh-Morpork thing, and just put a new one straight over the top. Hopefully it's set up slightly better, and it's got a nicer structure, so you should be able to use chapters to skip to bits you want to hear me talk about a bit more. The Kickstarter is now already up and running, it's taken me so long to get around to it. I backed it for the updates, but I've not taken a deep look at it yet, as I want to get this out of the way. I have seen though it's got over 1 million raised, so I'm excited to look at that. In the original film, I did flick through the magazine several times to look at all the pages. In this redo, you might not see all the parts, but it is available online easily, and hopefully there should be a link in the description if I remember to put it there. So let's move on to looking at the quick start. I know I call this a book, but it's more of a magazine, or a file if you don't bother to print it. But it's the first RPG in the Discworld universe not based in the GURP system, like the previous release. Unless there's some lesser known ones I don't know about, but mainly all I can find is GURPS. The last of those came out in 2016, and even then it had a large gap from the previous release. So if we check this out, it's a full 50 colour pages to start us off. It comprises the system rules, it's got an entry adventure, and it's got some pre-generated characters to get us started with. You'll notice the Adventures in Ankh-Morpork is the name, and the theme throughout the book is it's all related to and based inside the flagship Discworld city. The general style of it all reads very Pratchett-esque. There's some quotes that are straight from the book, yeah, but there's other places it seems like I read them going, this could have been taken from the books or modified from it, but it could be the author's just quite inspired and he's very good at mimicking the Pratchett style. There's footnotes aplenty, there's jokes and humour spread throughout. That's humour with a U, by the way. And there's several other bits where I looked. One of them describes a tavern saying, some days half full, other days half empty. I mean, that's the same, it's a classic. And you'll also find throughout several full-page art panels. Now, I'm fairly certain these are previous art that's been reused from books or posters or other promotional stuff. There might be other smaller bits inside the books. They might be new, they might be reused or repurposed from other bits. Perhaps the funding page has more detail. I'll look into that when I can. There are some sections in the book where I'll mention that all the rules are given, so it's simplifying it down for rules you need to know. I would expect the final book to be much more fleshed out and detailed and have a lot more content than what we get here. So the mechanics of this new system isn't combat based like some RPG systems are. And in fact, combat doesn't even have any special rules at all. The way the game progresses is just you want to do tests for any uncertain actions you're going to do. Combat's one of these, so that means most characters have the same chance of winning a fight as they do with putting their socks on straight in the morning. So, not a lot of hope for some. Now, if you've read the Science of Discworld novels, you would have been introduced to the element narrativium, and that's been used as a key concept for play. And the idea being that this element runs through everything in the world, so everything's got its own story to tell. The role of the characters is to change that story to fit their own narratives. Therefore, your characters don't have stat values on their character sheets. Well, they do have one, we'll get into later, but in a traditional sense, they don't have anything. Instead, they're just made up of traits. So they have their personality, their quirks, consequences of failure, organisation they work for, even their name if it comes to it. These determine how well your character can succeed at tests, and that's where there'll be a bit of dice rolling that comes in. So anytime your character wants to do something, they're going to face off directly against the narrativium. Now the story element is going to roll a D7A, but if you don't have one of those to hand, you can roll a D8 instead. The character attempting to beat this is going to try and roll off and get higher. They're going to use either a D4, D6, D10 or D12. And the question is, how do you know what dice to roll if you don't have any stats? And to do that, you're going to go with some wordplay. You look at your character sheet and you choose something about your character you think will help you. If our constables are trying to get information from some citizens, perhaps use the one with the trait Face of the People to go talk to them would be good for your success. If you're going to speak to a keen-nosed werewolf though, maybe you don't want to send to the character who has stinks like a skunk on them, because sometimes your traits can have negative effects on your outcome. So one thing about this, the game can be slightly subjective because it depends on your GM as to how well your actions proceed, because they choose what dice to roll. But they can't just sit on the fence, which is an interesting thing. So you can never roll the same as the Narrativium D8. The closer you can get is a D6 or a D10. So you're always going to have a better chance or worse chance of success than what the story is. You'll never be, 50-50. Okay, so if you don't have stats, the next question is going to be, how does the leveling up system work? There's no your characters level up, get stronger, get faster. Instead, your characters gain experiences. I know anytime your characters fail a test, they're going to suffer consequences. You can get something small like a paper cut to something large and extreme like losing an eye. And all of these will just give you something on your character sheet to note what's happened. These can give you negatives, so if you've got one eye, that's not so good. But the idea is maybe you can try and spin these to be a positive effect. If a character picks up a consequence where dragons within 2 feet of them explode, that's not very good if you're trying to rescue a load of dragons. However, if you happen to find your arch nemesis stood there holding a dragon, you're going to kind of want to walk within 2 feet of him. So hopefully you can put these things to good use. I do say all this, but as noted in the QuickStart, it only covers one adventure, so it hasn't actually covered character leveling up in their rules. So maybe I might actually be wrong on that part. The designers do note that the adventures are designed to be isolated, self-contained one-shots, similar to the novel series where you don't have a set continuous story. But from book to book you do get recurring characters with growth, such as Rincewind and Vimes, so I feel like your characters should be able to follow suit in this regard. So, discussing the novels, you'll find out this is how the gameplay works. Or at least for this sample adventure it does, and I get the impression similarly for future adventures. By that I mean the characters will work through scenes, and once they're done with the current task, they'll go on to the next scene. There's no filling material in between, or spending time getting lost down side streets trying to find wherever you're heading for. Once you're done the current location, you just go, I want to head here, you go straight to the next. There are still random encounters, and I'll get to talk about those later, but they're more planned random encounters rather than truly random. Now, if we swing back to talk about consequences, this is something the characters will pick up from failing tests against the Narrativium. They range in 4 stages, going all the way from inconsequential right up to exceptional. The GM decides before a test what the level of consequence could be. So let's have an example. We've got a suspect fleeing across the rooftops of Ankh-Morpork. There's a couple of constables in chase. Leading the way is Cliff, who's attempting to jump a gap to keep up. The GM decides it's a long way down, so he's going to fall if he fails, and it's going to be a major consequence. There's a hay cart down there, so he'll probably land in that. But this is where we're now going to bring in our one character stat, and that's luck. Any failed test can have a point of luck spent on it in one of 2 ways. The first is a character can reduce the level of consequence. So Cliff attempts to jump and he fails. It looks like he's going to fall down the street. By spending a point of luck, he reduces it to only suffer a minor consequence. So in this state, instead of plummeting to the streets, he actually trips and slips across the roof tiles, skidding to a halt right on the edge of the rooftop. He gains the consequence bruised knee as a result, but he's still up there on the roofs. He gets up and he decides he's going to try and get across the roof again. Clearly he's not very athletic, and clearly he doesn't learn from his mistakes. Again, he attempts it and he fails. This time, however, Constable Ampersand tries to help by spending a luck point. Other characters, if they're there, can assist, and to do that they spend their luck point, they describe how they're going to assist, and they'll roll as well. The downside to this, not only do both characters suffer the consequences if you fail, the consequences will actually be one step worse. In this case, Ampersand leads to help Cliff, but fails the roll, ends up wrapping around his colleague, and they both plummet to the ground. So rather than land in a haystack, the combined weight punches through the bottom of the haystack, landing on Cliff at the bottom. He ends up getting the exceptional consequence, which doesn't have a leg to stand on, and he's not going to return to this scene. This is actually as well an example of what you could call a near-death consequence. They're not fully covered in the quick start, they're more a need-to-know basis. They do state that they're going to be in the main rules. But anyway, that's enough rules and examples. You don't need more to get into it. So now we can just get up straight to the adventure, and it's the Up in Smoke, which is a sample adventure. So this is a nice mystery adventure to solve, using our characters as members of the Watch. So the way it plays out, it does feel like the characters are proceeding through a Watch novel. Although without access to all the other views that you'd find in a novel. There's no cut through back and forth, it's just watch, watch, watch. Mentioning the Watch novels, it does actually give you a suggested reading list before you get into this, and it features some of the Watch novels. You read those to give you background information which will be helpful, although it's not mandatory. I do get a few questions to pop up though, so would everyone need to read these, or would it just be the GM? Can you skip them and get straight into it and just assume anything you don't know about the watch you don't know isn't apply? And I want to know, is this going to be something to expect for every published adventure, or is it just going to be for this sample one because they've got the constraints on how many details they can actually add to it? Anyhow, so our characters are going to go through several locations, each time getting more information which can lead them to visit a new location on the map to get more information and so forth. It almost feels to me like a point-and-click adventure of Days Gone By, where you click on the right option and you see something yellow, which is now a new location you can travel to. You just got to ask the right questions, which then lets you unlock more questions to ask. The point of this, though, is the characters are going to make their way to the adventure finale, so it does suggest you can give them some helpful hints here and there, and if they get the wrong idea about something as well, for some information you've given them, you can even do some out-of-game table speak to say, oh, no, when I said this, I didn't mean that, before they start wandering off trying to sail out to a different city or something ridiculous like that. There's a pretty neat feature in the booklet as well. If you look at the map provided, the scenes are going to take place either on the east side or the west side, and you cross the central bridge anytime you change sides. Now, the central bridge is where the adventure finale takes place, but the booklet is set up to stick it all in the middle. So we start off on the left of the bridge, and all the locations are there. Then the next thing you get to is the bridge, so it actually puts the bridge as the next page you'll find, including the finale information, because that all happens at the bridge. And then all the locations on the right hand side are after the bridge. So if you're moving from left to right across the bridge, you just flick forward in the book. If you move from right to back, you just flick back in the book. No more trying to find where you were. It's set up nicely so you can just follow it as you move around from location to location. I do find it a bit of a shame there wasn't like a downloadable map provided, so you could have a nice table visual. You know, print that out and maybe print out all the locations as separate tiles, and then each time they have a new one, you just put it out on the board for them or on the map. But that's something you can easily homebrew yourself, or maybe might be some sort of add-on they do for the Kickstarter. We'll find out. In the adventure as well, every location is helpful to the GM. It describes the key events that already happened. It's got the current state of affairs at the location. It's got NPCs that exist for the characters to interact with. Each of them have also got their own traits. You can use these as inspiration from their personalities, but they can also affect how the characters roll for their tests, what dice they roll. Like, it's not here, but an example could be a watch member's trying to kick someone out of a tavern. Normally, the watch kicks people out of taverns all the time, they're good at it. If this NPC, though, say has the trait Bar and Brawler, they might not roll the dice they think they're going to roll when they try to do this. Even though we know the story, it's also going to have all the clues provided for characters to find so they can solve the mystery. And also gives us some example consequences at each location the characters might suffer for failing tests. Now, I do like that not all the consequences are detrimental traits. Obviously, the main aim is to solve a mystery, and the clues are key. So some of these consequences are actually, your clue was lost, your clue was damaged, you're removed from location, so you're denied the clues. Or one that's just outright red herring, you're given false clues. I do have one confusion specific about that one though. So your characters fail a test, so you then just give them the information. They're not going to think it's a bit odd that they failed and still got what they wanted. Maybe you'll work it in later rather than straight away, or maybe you'll work it in with something else going on, or something happened but you don't know what. I'm sure it's a bridge. I'll cross through it if I come to it during the playthrough. Now, when you're going through the adventures, players are free to mostly do what they want. There is a slight time-sensitive part of the mission, but otherwise they can just go wherever, do wherever, if they choose to. But I simply see this as actually the way it's going to work is with the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. Eventually they're going to reach the finale as it takes place on the bridge at the middle. It's all set up like that, so obviously every time they're moving from east to west, they're going to cross the bridge. But there's also every time they cross the bridge, it's got a list of random events that can happen. And a few of these will give clues that something on the bridge is different. Eventually, it's just going to be a smelly man on the bridge who's going to give you some very direct clues. I do understand some people will be quite dense, so maybe he might end up just physically shoving you over the edge to get you where you need to go. But now, eventually, your characters will get to the finale. There'll be possibly some more consequences. I do like that it adds stuff that can make it harder. So if they're having a pretty easy time, you can have extra bits. So normally there's a fuse. You can have a trick fuse that's going to relight itself, for example. Or a wagon that's open might be locked instead, just to give them some more challenges to overcome. And once this is all done, you just have a final wrap up, and that's it. Adventure over. Then the next question is, what's next? And clearly the answer to that is, get over about the Kickstarter. After all that, then at the back is the final part, and it's all the pre-generated characters they provided. And you can see here they're giving you a variety of races and personalities, but one thing they all share in common is they're members of the Watch. Of course, what we know so far is everything's planned to take place inside Ankh-Morpork, hence the title. And it's relevant as well if you've got a mystery to solve, so it makes sense that you're all playing as constables. But it will be interesting to see if the final books add more organisations you can be part of, especially when you're creating your own characters. There's several guilds, so you could be members of the Assassin's Guild or the Thieves Guild. Perhaps something's going down at Unseen University, so you'll need to play a wizard. Although this does lead me to two trains of thought. Firstly though, if this is the case that you've got multiple different adventures, does that mean you could be using different characters for each adventure? I mean, it does fit what we have. They're all self-contained stories, and it's like the novel series. If you read the novels in order, you can jump from the Watch to the Wizards to the Witches, all completely separate. So again, are we going to have all unconnected adventures and just have now and then pop back to the Watch guys you had from before? Does that also remove any of the leveling aspect I was thinking about earlier? We'll have to wait and see. And the second point this raises is talk about the wizards. It's how does magic work? Obviously there's no signs of any wizard in the QuickStart, so magic hasn't come up. They can't be left out completely full stop. Is it just going to be like combat where there's no specific rules, you're just going to test for magic somehow? It'd be nice to see how they implement it. I do have my own personal rule that I'd like to put in, and that is if Rincewind's in the game and you play him, anytime he performs a test with a D6, then he casts a spell automatically on a 7+. And that's just my attempt at humour and based off the original novels, and I'm just going to leave that there. Right, so my main takeaway from this quick start is there is a bit of imagination required to get the best experience. Between all the players and the GM, you could just play it straight, but then you probably lose some of the Discworld magic that the game system provides. As an example, we just did some stuff and created a gnome character called Gary Bright Idea. He might have had a bit of lore mixed in with something else. But Gary was looking for a clue in a dark alleyway and is trying to look at what trait to use. Well, the book says you can use anything on your character sheet, so Gary just went with his name. I have a bright idea of finding the clue, and that gives me a light bulb moment. So the light bulb flicked on above his head, and at that moment he unscrewed the light bulb and started waving it over ground using the light search for clues. And it's a moment like these that can come out of nowhere, and the GM decides how well you're going to do. So as I said, the game can be really subjective. If the GM thinks that's a really good pun, he could restore you a luck point or give you an automatic success. But if he's really not a fan, then you might be picking up the D4 far too often. Hopefully you guys can be on the same wavelength. Another thing mentioned before is you need to think about the level of Discworld knowledge required. It'd be interesting to see if they expect you to pick it all up from the background reading. I would hope that with a fully fleshed out book they could provide some of this. Some people who don't read as much of the books may not know that swamp dragons explode, or that trolls think better in the cold, or that dwarves are their mortal enemies. And will that change the game experience? It might not, unless it specifically says, oh, a troll character here would be really useful. Or the gargoyles up here are going to eat all the pigeons if left alone. I mean, the obvious one was the swamp dragons exploding comes up straight away in this adventure. If both sides had no knowledge, I imagine the adventure could easily be played because they just work with what they got. As long as you're having fun, there's no requirement to learn. But I'm hoping when we get full character creation chapters in the full book, you'll get the descriptions, details of each race and the various tropes or rules they follow. If I need to create several trolls, I'd rather have several different traits to pick from different aspects of their species rather than just having every troll using the same traits. Same as I'd hope for the different organisations, if they'd have different sections of those explaining these are some of the things to look for as wizards or guild members or so on. One positive, regardless of all that either way, is that it's just simple to get into the quick start. You can give a bit of background if needed, explain to the characters about the dice and using traits for your tests, and then you're off. Anything else they can find out as they go if they needed, and the book does provide you many example consequences. The back page even has a nice summary for the rules, and that gives you a few more consequences you can use. And while the location ones are quite specific, these are just some general ones you can use anywhere. And I do appreciate the simplicity and how the adventure can be considered almost on rails in quotes. Obviously you begin at the sanctuary and you'll get a clue that will unlock a new location. I say unlock in quotes as well. The location was already there, you just have no reason to visit it. But it's quite possible to continue this pattern of just moving from scene to scene. Every time you get a new clue that leads to a new location, move to a new location. Of course, you can always go back to where you were before to look for more clues or to quiz people again, and you will get multiple trips across the bridge as a reminder of this. but there won't be hours of downtime search for the players because they've gone a bit sandbox and taken a few wrong turns and they're lost, or they're in the 12th tavern of the day hunting for a man who's not even in the taverns, but they don't know this yet. So anyway, as I've said, it's live on Kickstarter now. Hopefully I should have a link to that and also to the QuickStart in the video description. It was interesting to note, having a quick look, there's other languages available. I wonder what sort of differences you can get with the wordplay if you're not using the native English writing. There might be a few puns that don't really work if you've translated it, but then again, they might have some quirky ones they come up with that we can't. Who knows? Anyway, if you watched all this, thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you'll have a look at the Discworld RPG and enjoy it, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video when the full thing arrives. Thanks so much, hope to catch you soon.